The cafeteria of Station Kepler 9 fell silent the moment Mira walked through the entrance. That wasn't unusual anymore. What made every multi-limbed, scaled, and tentacled being freeze mid-bite was the procession behind her. 3 Xalthrian cubs padded after the human, their obsidian claws clicking against the metal floor in perfect rhythm. Their silver fur bristled with youthful energy, and their 6 eyes tracked every movement in the room with predatory focus. The largest of them, Vel, walked closest to Mira's heel, occasionally bumping his massive head against her leg. Mira seemed oblivious to the terror she inspired. She hummed an earth tune, grabbed a tray, and began loading it with her usual fare: synthesized proteins, carbohydrate blocks, and something the other species called violence paste, but humans inexplicably labeled as hot sauce. The Xalthrians were apex predators from a death world that made Earth look like a garden colony. They stood 8 feet tall at maturity, possessed regenerative capabilities, and their bite force could crush titanium alloy. Their cubs were only slightly less dangerous, with the added unpredictability of youth. 3 cycles ago, when Ambassador Krell had suggested bringing Xalthrian youth to the station as a diplomatic gesture, the Council had agreed only because housing them in the maximum security xenobiology wing seemed safe enough. Then Mira happened. She'd been assigned as a xenobiological observer, tasked with documenting their behavior from behind reinforced glass. On her second day, she'd noticed Vel trying to reach a venting shaft that would have led him into the station's life support system. Without hesitation, she'd cycled through the airlock and walked into their enclosure. The security footage from that day had become the most watched file in station history. Mira had simply picked Vel up, picked up a 200-pound apex predator cub, carried him away from the vent, and booped his nose while saying, "No, absolutely not, mister." Vel had frozen. His siblings had frozen. The entire observation team had frozen. Then Vel had made a sound no Xalthrian had ever made before. A rumbling purr. Now, 3 months later, the cubs had been granted supervised cafeteria privileges. The supervision was Mira. The council had protested, but the cubs refused to eat unless she was present. And the Xalthrian ambassador had declared it an acceptable arrangement, given human durability. Mira settled at her usual corner table, and the cubs immediately curled around her, forming a living fortress of fur and fangs. She took a bite of her protein cube and glanced down at Vel, who was staring at her plate with unsettling intensity. "You already ate," she said firmly. Vel's ears flattened. He let out a low, rumbling whine that made the Zentarii delegation 3 tables over drop their utensils. "Don't give me that look. You had an entire synthesized carcass an hour ago." The cub shifted closer, his massive head now resting on the table beside her tray. His 6 eyes blinked in sequence. A behavior Mira had learned was the Xalthrian equivalent of puppy dog eyes. Absolutely not. A second cub, smaller but equally insistent, placed one massive paw on her knee. The third began a high-pitched mewling sound. The station's head chef, a Glorthian with 12 arms and a permanent expression of exasperation, approached the table. His translator crackled to life. "Human Mira, the cubs are disrupting the other patrons." "Perhaps, if you could..." "They're fine," Mira said, taking another bite. "They're just being dramatic. They are apex predators. They're babies." As if to prove her point, Vel rolled onto his back, exposing his belly while maintaining eye contact with her plate. It was a gesture of complete trust among Xalthrians, one that adults rarely displayed even to their own kin. Mira sighed. She broke off a piece of her protein cube and held it up. "1 piece. That's it." Vel snapped it from her fingers with frightening precision, his fangs coming within millimeters of her skin. The chef made a sound like escaping hydraulics. Several diners abandoned their meals and fled. Within seconds, all 3 cubs were sitting at attention, their tails sweeping across the floor, their eyes locked on Mira's tray. "This is extortion," she muttered, breaking her protein cube into smaller pieces. The cubs began their rumbling purrs in unison, a sound that vibrated through the floor and made the station's structural integrity sensors send a false alarm to engineering. By the time Mira finished feeding them, word had spread throughout the station. A crowd had gathered at the cafeteria entrance, watching through the transparent aluminum barriers. Ambassador Krell himself stood among them, his crest feathers raised in what might have been approval or concern. It was hard to tell with his species. "This is unprecedented," whispered a Kolrathi researcher. "Xalthrians don't share food. They don't accept food from other species. They certainly don't submit to feeding hierarchy from prey species." "Humans aren't prey," someone corrected. "Tell that to every predator species that's tried to classify them." Mira stood, stretching. The cubs immediately rose with her, flanking her sides. She grabbed her tray, heading for the recycling unit, and they followed in perfect formation. Before leaving, she turned to address the chef. "Next time I come in, could you have 3 small platters ready? Something with synthesized meat. Low sodium. They've been very good this week." The chef's translator emitted a sound like grinding gears. "You want platters for the apex predators. They deserve a treat. Plus, it'll keep them from staring at my food. Think of it as a safety measure." As Mira walked out, cubs in tow, Ambassador Krell approached the chef. "Give her whatever she requests. My people have observed human behavior across 7 systems. There are 2 rules. Never anger them, and never question their parenting instincts. They're not her offspring. Try telling them that." Krell gestured to where Vel had paused at the doorway, looking back to ensure Mira was following. The next day, 3 custom platters sat waiting in the cafeteria. The cubs ate with surprising delicacy, while Mira praised them. Station security reported a 30% decrease in aggressive incidents. The Xenobiology Department received 17 new research proposals about human-predator bonding, and somewhere in the galactic database, a new entry was logged. Humans capable of domesticating anything, given sufficient audacity, and complete lack of self-preservation instinct.